Welcome to the Jaime Fleres Podcast, a sanctuary for soulful creatives, leaders, and heart-centered humans navigating the edges of creativity, authentic expression, and personal growth. I am your host, Jaime Fleres, author, transformational guide, and founder of Whale Song Creative. Today, I'm dropping in solo to talk about something that I call the soul seasons. These are initiatory times throughout our lives and our development as humans on this planet that are sourced from or understood through the lens of astrology, through the lens of tracking these patterns out in the cosmos that bear reflection on our own inner landscape and our own inner journey of the soul. I would like to share this in the context of how we can use this wisdom, this deep intelligence that is vast and bigger than our human minds, to co-create a life that is deeply soul-led. So I'm so excited to dive into this topic today. And what I'd like to do today is I'm kind of pulling from all sorts of notes here, so bear with me. I want to talk about soul initiations from this astrological perspective and give you a little bit of background about how I came into this work, especially if you know me through my agency Whale Song and you haven't heard me talk about astrology before. I want to lay some foundation and give some context. I want to give kind of just like an overview of this body of work that I think is really supportive. I'm going to give some examples of how I've worked with this in my own life to show how walking with this insight and information and orientation can really be supportive on the path. And then talk about some ways that I'm supporting others with this body of work at this time. So for those of you who don't know, yes, I'm the founder of Whale Song Creative. We help people write books. So I've been reading books by incredible creatives in the realms of personal growth and spirituality for many decades now. And I've also had a healing arts business. And back in, when did I start? I think it was probably 2017. I had, prior to that, I'd always kind of known about astrology and thought that it was interesting, but never really fully resonated with anything that I'd interfaced with. And in 2017, I was going through a really big shift in my own life, and I had a reading that really changed my life. It was with my, soon to be after that mentor, Sayao Long, who was an elder and deep wisdom keeper of astrology and soul. And I had a reading with him that really resonated and really changed my life. And I got very interested in astrology and what it had to offer as a tool to help us navigate our lives. And what I thought was a single session turned into a year-long apprenticeship, and I started studying this ancient art. From there, I naturally started wanting to look at my friends' charts and my family's charts and really get into it. And then from there, it naturally evolved into becoming a professional shamanic astrologer, which I was for several years until it, kind of shifted, till I shifted gears and really went deeper into the bookwork. But it's never fully left me. It's just one of the tools that I walk with. And I use it in my personal life and I use it with my clients. And I think it's really valuable. And it's coming back around for me right now in this season. I think because we're navigating so much disruption and chaos in the outer world. And a lot of us are in processes of deep soul growth and profound transformation. This tool is returning. And I've had many of the people in my community reach out recently and ask me if I would do an astrology session for them. And it's just coming back around as a tool that wants to be shared again and a body of work that wants to be spoken to. So that's what I'm up to here and a little bit of my background. And I want to talk first. For some of you, you're going to be like, I love astrology. I'm super into it. I already work with it in my own way, or I'm astrology curious. For others of you, you're like, what are you talking about astrology, right? Especially those of us who've only interfaced with like a daily horoscope in a newspaper or something. You're like, what is this? It's not that useful. Or if you really only know your sun sign and you've been told that that's who you are and you're like, maybe, there are many ways to interface with astrology, some of which are a little bit more surface and a little bit less specific and less useful. And then there's ways to work with this ancient art that is really deeply supportive for the soul. So I want to just share a few things about my approach to astrology. Shamanic astrology is really an archetypally based astrology. It's not distorted by a lot of the Western conditioning. It's a little bit more of an ancient practice. And so it's not as colored by patriarchal domination systems and kind of Western ways of conceiving. It's a little bit more liberated from that. And it's very archetypal. So it's ancient and pattern based. And I firmly don't believe it's very supportive for us as humans to outsource our sovereignty to the stars. I think it's really important that we co-create. We think about it as a co-creative journey, as a resource, as a set of information or insight that we can walk with and use to walk our path in a sovereign and co-creative way. So I don't believe that, I'm not a big fan of predictive astrology, although I think there are ways that we can kind of tell what time it is by looking at astrology through timing techniques. But I think of it more rather than a definitive answer or some kind of like crystal ball. It's more an opportunity. It's a cosmic compass. It's a way for us to help navigate our lives and our experiences. And it's a pattern recognition system. So it helps us recognize patterns and cycles within the natural way of living as humans, as organic beings, as participants in this great cosmos, that there are seasons of that our soul goes through. And I'll talk about this more in a moment. And when we can track and align with what we're up to, from a cosmic perspective, what the invitations are, the initiations are at different times in our lives, we can work with them and life begins to happen for us rather than to us. So I believe in using astrology in a co-creative way. And I believe in holding it loosely as I do many healing modalities and tools, which is like, let's see what right relationship with this body of wisdom and this insight is for me personally. So I wanted to share that to start. So back in the day when I became a professional astrologer, I was studying. I was in my apprenticeship with my mentor and I was trying to get my hands on everything I could to learn about. And I got really interested in these soul-based initiations that we go through that are reflected in the stars. And I built a body of work called Soul Seasons. I had originally called it Midlife Mastery, although I got some feedback in an entrepreneurial circle that nobody wanted to see themselves in midlife, especially if they were in their mid-30s, and that I would probably do better to rename it, which I still stand behind Midlife Mastery. I think that, and the reason being between the ages of like 35 and 52 or so, like this midlife period of the arc of our lives, there are several initiations, astrological initiations that fundamentally change who we are from that 30s point to the early 50s, late 40s. There's a series of initiations that we can point to, and I'll talk more about those today. And they initiate us into different ways of being, into different soul development tasks. Knowing that, it's helpful. So I called them soul seasons and I created a body of work around soul seasons. So just to briefly say what that is, in terms of astrology, a lot of people, if they've engaged briefly, they know like maybe what their sun sign is, or maybe they know their rising sign, or, there's this sign-based astrology, right? Which is like, what is this expression of different aspects of yourself? Like what qualities are you embodying in these different parts of your life and aspects of yourself? Now, the planets they're like less represented, especially in pop astrology. But the planets and their movement are how we track these cycles and these seasons of our lives. And so soul seasons is really based on planetary movements. And so from an astrological perspective, we don't see human development as a linear march from birth to death. That's just kind of haphazard and just kind of happens and situations just act upon us. That there's actually a deeper intelligence, a deeper rhythm, a deeper series of cycles that help usher our soul through our human development to gather wisdom and experience in life. So we see these life cycles as a series of spiralic journeys, right? We're on this spiral path and they're meant to grow our souls, offer us like these priceless earth school experiences and help us along our soul path. So these soul seasons that I speak of are a series of invitations and initiations, as I said, and they vacillate between periods of expansion and periods of contraction. So if you think about just like natural principle, right? There's inhale and exhale. There's growth and decay, right? So these cycles also operate on that very basic principle of expansion and contraction. And so we can see through time whether we're in a period of expansion or contraction from this larger kind of perspective. And it helps us to see that there's one, a well-orchestrated choreography of divine movements between our soul and the cosmos through time. And we can learn how to work with those seasons and times in our lives in a more co-creative and aware way. Just to give you a little bit of time context, there are periods, so speaking to this expansion and contraction, the expansive times through, and really I'm just looking through, there are periods outside of the realm of what I'm going to share, but these times where anything is possible, these periods of our lives astrologically where things seem to be in expansion, in growth, in possibility, those periods tend to run from age 20 to 24, 35 to 37, 46 to 48, 55 to 58, and in the early 60s. And of course, there's rhythms on either side as well that I haven't named. There's also periods of contraction, more dense and challenging periods, or periods where more of a comprehensive sobriety is required of us in our lives to really take inventory, get serious about some things, and things might be heavier during those times. So those more dense or challenging periods can often happen from 28 to 30, 37 to 40, 43 to 46, 50, 51, 52-ish, and then 58 to 60. So they happen in these vacillations, right? Like expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. So just knowing that, whether you're in an expansive state or in a contractive state, obviously it's just one piece of a bigger picture, that can be helpful. So, and then there's also the way we look at it from a shamanic astrology perspective. Another way to look at this is that there are different planetary initiations that happen in different realms or aspects of our lives. So in shamanism, there's this idea of the three worlds, right? We have the underworld or the lower world, where psychologically and psychospiritually, we're asked to face our fears, meet our shadow, do deep emotional processing work, metabolize the experiences and emotions and traumas and experiences of our lives. They're the deep work, that deep kind of like under the ground sort of work. And a couple of the planetary initiators of underworld processes or lower world processes are Pluto and Chiron. And I'll speak to a few other planets that actually move through all three of these levels at the end here. But so we have the underworld or lower world initiator. So when you're in like a Pluto cycle or a Chiron cycle, that's often going to be the kind of work that you're asked to do on a soul level, is that deep work. Then we have middle world initiators. Those are the ones that help us make progress in our day world, in our careers, in our relationships, in our what we're up to in the world, how we're, it can even be about where we're living and that sort of thing. And those initiators are Saturn and Jupiter. And then we have upper world or celestial initiators. These are planetary guides who are meant to initiate us in what we call like more celestial realms. They're the ones who take us kind of up and out. I think of it as like opportunities and moments for grace and synchronicity. And I define grace as those things that are offered to us through life, these opportunities and experiences that we don't earn, that aren't based on what we've done or not done. They're handed to us because we're, students of life, that we're just because we simply exist. Those are opportunities where we sometimes get great insight, revelation, break patterns. There's a whole set of things that happen in celestial world cycles. And the prime planetary teachers or initiators in the celestial realm are Uranus and Neptune. So we also have the personal planets, which again, this might be above your head. So just take the concept, not above your head, like you won't understand, but it might not be a language that you already speak. Those are all the planets I named are more outer planets, or just at the cusp of the outer planets and the inner planets. The inner planets are considered more personal planets. So I'll speak just specifically here about Venus, Mars, and Mercury. They are personal planets, and they also have these cycles that they move through that give us these like time-based experiences in our lives. But they can traverse all realms. So they can be sometimes underworld initiators, sometimes middle world, sometimes celestial world. So they can kind of go through all of them, and they do. And there's a bunch of cycle information I could talk about there. But so going back to soul seasons, so there's a couple, there's not just two, but there's what I call soul seasons, like classical soul seasons, are time-based initiations. So even when I spoke about expansion and contraction phases, like those I was looking specifically at time-based transits. That means about everyone at the same age will go through that same initiatory portal. So that's one kind of astrologically based timing phenomenon. And then we also have personal transits, which are unique relationships that happen in our chart that aren't time-based, that could happen at any time and are based on our own personal natal chart, which is basically the picture of the sky at the moment that you were born. So we have these major time-based cycles, and then we have other cycles that are happening that are very unique to us. So an astrologer can look into, and this is some of the work that I do in Soul Seasons, we can look into the charts. Now, there are other timing-based techniques, things like progressions and perfections and all sorts of other solar arcs. And there's all sorts of other things that maybe you know what those words mean, or maybe I'm already like speaking gibberish to you. But there's lots of ways to look at timing in astrology. But I like using these big movements because they really are soul initiations, and they really help us to orient to what time it is. So again, these aren't like we're outsourcing ourselves to these initiators. It's almost like they become our teachers, our mentors. They have a curriculum for us to move through, and we will naturally go through that curriculum in some way, shape, or form. But when we bring awareness and consciousness to the curriculum we're in, like what class am I taking right now in soul school, we can work with it more in a more empowered way. So that's what this work is all about, is like, it's not that you're fundamentally missing something if you're not aware, but when we can bring consciousness to it, things can change, and how we relate to our life can change. So that's why I think this is so powerful. Yeah, so I was going to read, I have this book, one of the many books that I love, referencing when it comes to soul seasons and these cycles that we move through, not only individually, but also collectively. There's this incredible book I'll show you for those who are watching called Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas. Such a good book. I'm just going to quote from it quick because I love to. So this is just kind of speaking to why it's important to know these cycles. So the natural human tendency is to want to know that the general outlook for the foreseeable future is uniformly positive and will only get better. Yet there are advantages to knowing when a potentially challenging reality is there in advance, facing it squarely, preparing for it, and recognizing its signs and characteristic motifs, its dangers, and its positive potential when it is consciously assimilated and enacted. Perhaps equally important, it can be psychologically centering and spiritually fortifying to recognize that such periods may represent the unfolding of larger cycles of archetypal development and human evolution in a context that is in some sense cosmic, subtly ordered, and intelligible, rather than arbitrary, random, and meaningless. So I think this is the gift that this body of wisdom, that this insight offers to us, is that instead of us feeling like life is just randomly, meaninglessly punishing us or subjecting us to a set of experiences that we may or may not prefer, we can use this, the work of astrology and the work of this particular part of astrology, to help us orient and recognize that we are actually part of something bigger. We're part of the mystery that operates within us and around us and, and much beyond us. And so the idea is that knowing these things, again, they're not predictive, but knowing kind of what time it is for your soul or what season it is for your soul helps you orient, helps you navigate. So I like to use lots of metaphors always, but in this particular context, thinking about, I intentionally use the word seasons simply because, if I tell you it's winter, it doesn't mean that you can say for certainty that you're going to be snowboarding or going ice fishing or whatever one might do in the winter. It's not predictive, but it tells us like what time it is. So in terms of preparation and being able to navigate, like we're not going to leave the house in a bikini in the winter, in a cold winter, because we know what time it is outside, right? We know what actions are appropriate and what actions are not appropriate, how to prepare, how not to prepare, ways to work with what is so in the context of our lives rather than against it. If it's, 11 p.m., we know it's not breakfast time, right? It's not that one thing is bad or not bad, or it's just what time it is. So it's good to know what time it is, what season it is. Okay, I think I've got that point. Okay, let's talk about a few examples. I have many examples from my own life. So I've been walking with this medicine in my own life and in a personal way since 2017. So almost 10 years now. And I find it just really helpful as one source of information that helps give me information and orientation in my life. So the first example I want to give is actually something that I've looked at retrospectively. So I didn't have the wisdom of astrology when this was happening to me, but looking back on it now, it provides me some really rich context and a way to make meaning from the experience that I lived. So in my late 20s, let's see, I think I was 29, my dad passed away. And during that time, astrologically, I was in the Saturn return, which some of you might know the Saturn return, the illustrious Saturn return of the late 20s. And this is a time period where it's a major identity maturation threshold. It's this big moment where we're asked to reckon with what we've inherited as our set of beliefs and conditions about what is so on this planet, in our lives, in culture and community. And it's an opportunity for us to strip away anything that's immature, inflated, or borrowed that doesn't belong with us in our next chapter of life. So it's a big reckoning for a lot of people. In fact, I forget exactly what it's called. It's like the 27 Club. There's been a number of professional musicians and artists who have passed during this portal. And there's a lot that's been spoken about that, which I can't speak to off the top of my head, so you'll have to forgive me. But those deaths correlate with this astrological transit. And that does not mean that a Saturn return is a death transit by any means, but it is a reckoning and a maturation period. It's a big threshold, initiatory threshold in the human life cycle. And so I encourage you to go look that up if you're curious. So I was in a Saturn return. And I was also, so the day that my dad died, I was in Saturn-Pluto square. So Saturn, again, so all of these planets and the signs, they're archetypes. So an archetype has lots of layers and lots of possibilities. They're multidimensional. It's not like this equals this, right? It's like this is associated with, and there's this whole radiant structure of all things archetypally that something is associated with. So Saturn is, connected to our maturation. Saturn cycles are oftentimes when we're asked to get really serious and take a really sober look at our lives. What is so? And kind of ask, like, what game am I playing? And do I want to keep playing that game? Do I like the rules? Do I want to change the rules? We call Saturn cycles like resume events. There's often big progress in the middle world during Saturn seasons. And so Saturn is also connected to authority and to the father, archetypal father, both our father and the father, like in any way that you want to take that, and also our inner father complex, if we're looking at it from like a Jungian perspective. So Saturn is that father principle, it's structure, it's the masculine. There's lots of ways that lots of associations with Saturn. So as I said, when my father passed, I was in a Pluto Saturn square. So I was in my Saturn return and Pluto had come to make a square with Saturn. So also just to share when I'm talking about transits and all of that, transits are the overlay of two maps, the map of the sky when we were born and the map of the sky as it is now, or whatever time period we're looking at. And within those, there are angles that are made or connections that are made. And those are what kind of indicate what cycle or season we're in. So that may or may not be relevant, but let me get back to this. So Saturn is the father principle, among other things. And Pluto also represents, so Pluto underworld initiator, can represent death, irreversible transformation. So I wouldn't necessarily look at somebody's chart and say, there's a Pluto square to your Saturn. This is when so-and-so is going to die. That would not be appropriate because that's not conspiring with the mystery. That's assuming that you know the future. And that's not the same thing, how we're using astrology here. But looking back, when I see the astrological context I was in during that time, I can see what initiations were happening for me on a deeper level, that I was being asked to look at the patterns and the relational dynamics and all the things I've received around father, around authority. And I was being asked, in these cycles to ask questions like, how am I relating to authority? How am I relating to my own internalized authority? These are times, the Saturn return is a time where we move from possibility to responsibility, from freedom to commitment, from experimentation to embodiment. So I was in a lot of those initiations. And when I looked, I actually went on a little bit of a tangent this morning. I looked back at that time in my life with the astrological knowledge I have now. And I'm like, man, I can see everything that I was going through then. It's all in the astrology. So had I known, I did walk through that period of my life pretty consciously. It was a huge conscious opening for me, actually. I took that time to be I took it very spiritually and made it an opportunity for me to grow. It was a very big initiation in my life, that time period. And had I known then what I know now, I would have had a little bit more of an orientation to what I was being asked to navigate on the soul level. Because at that time, it was also like, right when we're only using kind of our conscious day mind, we're like, I can't believe, my dad's dying. I can't believe this is happening. We're kind of like reacting to life happening to us rather than seeing what's conspiring in our favor. And I don't mean to make like the death or illness of a loved one something that's in our favor. It's definitely not. But there are invitations and ways that our soul wants to grow during those periods, even really challenging periods. When we know what the invitation is, we can start working with that invitation. Okay, so that's one example. Another example is, and I tend to have very big experiences during Pluto cycles. Part of that is because I have a natal Pluto complex, we could say, that makes Pluto a very important, it's like one of my main teachers in this lifetime. Pluto is a very, like at Hogwarts, this would be like my main, like, school, like whatever the sorting hat put me in, like I would be in the Pluto Pluto house, Pluto school. So I learn a lot through my Pluto initiations because that's just part of my walk on this planet. So I entered the Pluto square. So Pluto square is a time-based transit, happens in your late 30s. It varies a little bit because of Pluto's cycle and how erratic its orb is in its orbit. But generally, we're looking at like our late 30s, early 40s. Massive astrological transit. This is the time that I got divorced, that I lost everything. Like I had this huge death rebirth cycle in my own life. And I was doing deep, deep Pluto work. I was looking at my own shadows. I was looking at things that I had built in my life that weren't honoring my essence and my own sovereignty. I was looking at how I navigated Eros, right? That principle of connection and life force and aliveness and all of that. I was doing that work during that time. I was in this erotic reclamation. I was doing all this Pluto work. And I did know that I was in a Pluto cycle. So I knew how to walk with that time. So rather than feeling like everything was falling apart around me and it was my fault, I still had to navigate the challenges of that time. But I did so in an empowering way. I knew the curriculum I was in. I knew what the invitations were on a soul level, and I could collaborate with that and make sense of and meaning make in my life at that time with the help of understanding this time that I was in. So I was able to work with it in a really empowered way. Doesn't mean it was easy, right? Just because it's snowing outside doesn't mean that it's not going to, doesn't mean you don't have to shovel the driveway or like scrape the car window or whatever. Like it's still going to be its own challenge, but we know what we're up to. We're not surprised that it's snowing outside and we have to do this thing, right? It's like, okay, we can co-create. So that's the second example that I want to share. And, when I looked back, I'm like, well, of course, that was the portal in which all of that would happen because it's just what time it was. Like, it didn't mean that I was like ultimately destined to have those experiences, but it made sense based on the time, right? It's just like it makes sense that you're tired when it's 11 or 12 at night, right? Okay. So then there's a third one that I want to talk about, and this is the Uranus opposition, which happens in the early 40s. And the reason I want to mention this one is that also part of the beautiful work that Richard Tarnas does in Cosmos and Psyche is that he is this master researcher that's like really tracked and looked at the cycles and seasons. And he's looked at many, many different famous people's time rhythms and made some very important contributions to our understanding of these larger patterns and cycles, both in personal individual lives, but also in the collective. So he does this incredible job in this book. This is not meant to be a pitch. I'm not getting I don't know Richard personally, but he does this incredible mapping. In fact, there's something we're going through astrologically right now around Saturn and Neptune. And if you read his sections about Saturn and Neptune, you're like, this is prophetic. Like he wrote this book, I think in 2006. So, I mean, I'm recording this in 26. So 20 years later, let me just confirm that I am accurate there. 2027. Anyway, it's been a long time since he wrote this book. If you read it right now about the time we're in right now, you're like, how did he know? Because he knows the cycles, right? So, okay, so I digress. Let's go back to Uranus. So the Uranus opposition, okay, midlife crisis, right? This idea, like we used to colloquially say that the midlife transit was like when men would buy new fancy race cars, or people would just like hightail it to India and take a sabbatical, like, or people would divorce and marry younger. Like those are things that we know kind of on this social level of like the midlife crisis. But of course, on the soul level, a midlife crisis is much deeper. It's layered. It's not a single event, even in astrology. It's a multi-year process that we undergo as we transform from our younger selves into our more mature selves. And so some people really look at that Pluto square that happens in the late 30s as being the midlife crisis. Some people look at this Uranus opposition, which happens in our early 40s, as the midlife crisis. So you can listen to different astrologers speak about this. But they're all a series of initiations. So I like to think of them, if you've ever been out looking at the waves in the ocean, often big wave sets come through, and then they have some quiet, and then another big set of waves comes through. So this period of astrological initiations from the mid 30s to the mid 40s into the 50s are like a big old set of waves that come through, and they're powerful and they change the landscape. So I think that you could look at either one, and it depends probably on your unique life history and your individual chart actually to determine which one is going to have the biggest bang. How we meet these cycles is also quite dependent on how we've been metabolizing our life experience up till this time. So if we've been consciously working with the material that we're given by life, these initiations might feel differently than if we've been avoiding or suppressing or not being willing to face certain life experiences or life invitations. So these experiences can be highly individual, even those that are timed. So the Uranus opposition, I want to talk just from a little bit of Tarnas's work here. So he has tracked all these biographies. So I'm going to give you this list of people. Rosa Parks, Betty Friedan, who's a feminist who wrote The Feminine Mystique, Galileo, Descartes, Newton, Freud, Jung, Einstein, Darwin, right? All of these people, great innovators and thinkers of our times, because they've all lived in different timelines. They were all in this Uranus transit when they had their biggest breakthroughs in their careers, like when they made the biggest revelations, when they had the biggest leaps in consciousness, when they had a sudden revelation, when they disrupted the status quo, when they broke through some previous understanding into some new way of understanding that for a lot of those folks fundamentally changed our collective. So they were all in the same cycle. So if you can imagine knowing that you were in your breakthrough moment cycle, knowing that, how might you work with it differently? Like how might these individuals have worked with their time individually? Like they would have still had the breakthroughs, but they would have known how to meaning make it potentially in a different way. They would have been able to see the context and understand, it might have helped them believe in the work that they were up to at that time. It might have helped them have context for the meaningful revelations they were having at the time, right? And so that's true in our own lives as well. When we know we're in these periods, Uranus cycles are for breakthrough, for the shifting of old patterns and structures, not because those patterns and structures were bad, but simply because it's time to change. They're times of novelty and sudden breakthrough, synchronicities, sudden unexpected events, right? So if we know that that's what time it is, we can anticipate that. So an example I'll give you from my personal life, this is a personal transit. It happened just after my Uranus opposition, but Uranus came to meet up with my descendant, which is a point in the chart that is really about relationships. At the exact hour that these two met up in the sky, I had a fated encounter with somebody who, for me, my experience of this person was like a deep soul kin, right? It wasn't the kind of connection that was going to fit in any boxes, right? He wasn't just friend, he wasn't just partner, he wasn't anything. There were no boxes to check with this person, but we had this deep, resonant connection. Because I knew the astrology, because I knew exactly what time it was for my soul, I didn't make it mean anything that wasn't already there, but I knew the context. I was like, I know this is probably going to be a relationship that's meant to wake me up, to like activate me in some way. It's not necessarily going to be any kind of traditional relationship dynamic. And I knew how to walk that time. I didn't get all up in my head about like, maybe this is my partner, or maybe this. Like, I didn't use like the social scripts that I was handed to understand what was happening. I had a larger map that I could reference, that I was like, I get it. Like, this is right on time for my soul. And I was able to use the experience that I had with this person to get the initiation that my soul was seeking. I don't mean that in an extractive way. I mean that in a really beautiful co-creative way, and really come to appreciate the specific gifts that were meant for me at that time, without overlaying it with any kind of blame or self-judgment or storytelling that actually wasn't very helpful for me at the time. These are all just examples of me sharing with you what it's like to walk, what it's like for me to walk with these cycles. And I also have helped many people walk through these different cycles. So, for example, I just had a client that I worked with last week who's, in the perimenopausal transition, in some of these cycles. And it's so clear when you start to look at the astrology, when you've been trained in it and you can see the patterns and the meanings and the associations and the archetypal representations. When you start to look at the charts and you know how to look, a story starts to emerge. So I always say it's like knowing the verbs and the nouns and the adjectives, like the building blocks of this language. And then once you're able to bring that all together, there's like a poem that starts to emerge, right? There's like some kind of artistic story that begins to emerge, this mythical kind of mythic. I don't mean that in like a false way, but like this deeper soul story that begins to emerge. And as I was looking at this client's chart, I could see the story emerging. I was like, this is such a period of reckoning. It was Pluto at work doing what Pluto does best. And I was like, okay, I can't say without speaking to this person exactly what's happening in their lives. But as we got on the call, everything that they were saying was like exactly what this astrology was sharing. So instead of using it as a predictive tool, I was able to use it with her as like, okay, here, let me deeply validate what you're going through. Let me put it in this larger context and help you see that this isn't something that's happening to you because you've done anything wrong. It's just simply what time it is. And I was able, through the archetypal lens, to understand what practices, behaviors, orientations, ideas would actually help them move through this time in their lives, so that they had a set of tools, a set of resources, a set of gifts and ways of moving through this time. So that's what this work really does, is to help you kind of orient to what time it is for your soul. So oftentimes I look around in the circles that I run in, entrepreneurial women's groups and, different groups, and I see people going through different things. And I'm like, gosh, if they knew their astrology right now, it could really help them orient. So, for example, there's certain cycles in our lives where we're not meant to like build a business or start a new relationship, or, we're not meant to. And so if we're trying to, it's like we keep hitting our head on the wall and we're like, there must be something wrong with me. I keep hitting my head I keep knocking on this door and it won't open, right? But if we know what cycle we're in, we can go, actually, your time right now would probably be best spent doing vision work, doing wandering a little bit, getting lost a little bit. Like, that's actually what time it is for your soul. And if you do that work this season, you'll be able to make that progress next season, right? And a lot of people, we just don't have that context. So we kind of walk around. I think of it as like walking around in the dark. Like, if you don't have the light on, you're going to bump into things. It's going to be uncomfortable. But when we can turn the light on, we can see where everything is and we can kind of navigate it with greater awareness. So another metaphor for you here. So that's a little bit about how I work with these cycles. Is, again, it's co-creative. I'm never going to tell you this is what's going to happen next, because I don't know. That's not the role of astrology. It's definitely not my role. I've definitely had people sit down in chairs across from me and ask me some pretty serious questions for which astrology does not have an answer. Astrology is a walk with the mystery. It's not a tool that offers definitive information about the future. Yeah, I think I've nailed that point. Okay, so let me just transition as we close here to share that how to work with this material. So if you're interested in learning more about this, I mean, there's definitely resources out there that you can put your fingers on. I have my Soul Seasons course, which is still available if you want to kind of take like a solo journey through this information. But I have 3 ways that I'm really offering people an opportunity to work with me in these spaces around this material right now. So the first is a 2-hour deep dive where I spend hours with your charts and really get that picture, that beautiful poem that's coming through about your soul and what time it is for you. I spend time really investigating that. And then we get on a 2-hour call and we talk about what's happening contextually in the astrology for you right now, how that's actually showing up in your life. So it's not just information that like doesn't feel relevant, but we actually apply it and use it as a lens to look at your actual life in this moment and help you navigate what's going on. So giving you those tools, those resources, those ways of navigating this time. And that's just a single session, like, okay, I'm gonna take it and run. I also have a longer container of support. I'm calling it Attraversiamo, which is Italian for let's cross over. I'm honoring my Italian genes here. So it's for those of us who are in big transitions who are like, I'm going to need more than just like a session to talk about this stuff. I want somebody that I can actually walk with. And that work not only combines all of the astrology that I've been talking about, but I use a lot of my other tools in my toolbox, in my psychospiritual toolbox. So we do narrative inquiry, we do ritual, personalized ritual, we do kind of a deeper exploration of your own life and kind of counseling around how to navigate these times. And we also do some depth work. So we do some deep unconscious, deep psyche work where we're actually letting your own wisdom intelligence come forward and share what wisdom it has on these times in your life. So it's rather than referencing socially, like out horizontally to what other people are saying we should do or what our experiences mean or any of that, we're kind of going vertically where we access the cosmos, deep soul truth, wisdom, and then help you align so that you can navigate through your life right now with integrity, with sovereignty, with choice and empowerment. So that's the 2-month container. And then I also am doing a practitioner training because I've done actually a lot of teaching and mentorship through astrology. I've been invited to many different programs from other coaches and practitioners to speak inside their communities, in their programs and that sort of thing. So I'm also doing a practitioner training, which includes the Soul Seasons curriculum. So you get all the information. And then we also have 3 individual sessions, you and I, one to get you really acquainted with your own timing so that you can really situate yourself in your own context. And then I help you learn how to bring this into your work as a coach, as a healer, as a practitioner, as a guide, so that you can use this tool and this insight to support your clients. So all of those are options, ways that we can work together. Hopefully, even if none of those fit for you, you learned something interesting or got to at least field some interesting ideas today. Please let me know if you have any questions. This is a world that I've been swimming in for a long time. So I know this language, but there may have been some gaps in my explanation. So I'd love to hear. Yeah, I think I will leave it there. So I appreciate you joining me for this episode of the Jaime Fleres Podcast. If you loved the episode or found it resonant, I would love it if you'd share it with a friend so these conversations can continue to spread and support others. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. There's so many good things that are happening in this channel right now. And your reviews are also greatly appreciated. And they're really how we find our way into the ears and hearts of others. If you want to check out my work or have any questions about it, links are in the show notes. You can also reach out to me. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks for taking this adventure into the cosmos and into the psyche with me. And I look forward to connecting with you again soon.